Let's check in with our political analyst, Brian Browne, again to gain more insight into the election results. Hi, Brian. Now, Brian, let's break down the results in some states and counties. When you look at Florida, which President Trump won, you'll see he did well in Miami-Dade County, which has a big Latino population. It's also a state that has a large number of senior citizens who are the high-risk group for COVID. Now, the president has taken a lot of heat for how he handled the pandemic, but it appears seniors backed him as well. Your thoughts on Florida?
Well, Florida, the Hispanic vote, particularly in Florida, is not a monolithic vote. And there's real differences between the Cuban vote, the Venezuelan vote versus Mexicans or Puerto Ricans. And that's important to consider. Joe Biden seemed to underperform in Miami-Dade County, and that was a place that he really needed to do well. I think, President Trump had more of a ground game. He considers Florida his home. The senior citizen vote is interesting. I think a lot of that was people voting their pocketbook and looking at the economy, not necessarily the coronavirus first. But Florida is always one of those states that you never know what's going to happen.
You know, another interesting spot is Kenosha, Wisconsin, which we know was the scene of the police-involved shooting of Jacob Blake over the summer, and then protests and civil unrest. Even though Biden won the state, Donald Trump led in that county. Does that mean his focus on law and order was the right strategy?
Well, it's very interesting, and the exit numbers are still early, but President Trump seemed to improve amongst Black and brown voters in general, men and women. And that is a very interesting take when you think about some of the events that occurred over the summer. I think law and order is important to almost every voter, in particular some of these voters in the suburbs that you find in Wisconsin. So that's an interesting take. But again, I think President Trump, he may end up losing these states, but I think he overperformed the expectations in many of them.
You just mentioned something. According to the conservative magazine National Review, President Trump has won the highest share of non-white voters of any Republican presidential candidate since 1960, citing an Edison poll which shows more Black men and women supported him this year compared to 2016. So you just mentioned that. Does that surprise you at all?
It does. I think some of the old coalitions are fraying. I think something that, one takeaway from this election could be that, the Republican Party in some circles has an appeal to, maybe folks who economically would have appealed to Democrats historically. There's some very interesting data coming out in terms of who voted and on what issues. And I think the old playbook we're going to have to throw away because our politics is not the same. It's changing as our demographics are changing. And some of these voters cannot and should not be taken for granted when it comes to politics.
All right, and turning to the congressional races quick, I just want to ask you about Arizona. The Senate seat once held by the late Republican John McCain was flipped by the Democrats. Astronaut Mark Kelly winning that race. Do you think that's a result of the Trump-McCain rift or his widow Cindy McCain endorsing Biden? What do you think?
I think it's those factors as well as some of the demographics is changing. A much more of an engaged Hispanic population in Arizona. I think another important takeaway is that there did not seem to be any down ballot momentum or energy when it came to a lot of these races, whether it's the U.S. Senate seats or some of the House seats that we've seen. People really split their ticket, and that is an interesting political phenomena.
All right, Brian Browne, St. John's political science professor. Always great having you with us.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
If you're watching Currents News on YouTube, be sure to hit the subscribe button and then click on the bell to get instant updates about all of our newest content because we are putting your faith in the news.